We all imagine our lives and our futures in the context of what we have already experienced. The way that we imagine our future in terms of something that we have yet to experience that could be even more amazing than anything we've experienced so far, which is what we want, right? Is to trust the unknown. What is up, guys? Welcome to my guest room. Welcome to a different camera, because today we are going to be talking about some chill, chatty topics, mainly around 5 things that I did this year, 5 decisions that I made that changed my life for the better. I believe in resolutions, but I also think that it is arguably more valuable to take a look backwards and, you know, appreciate, give yourself the proper accolades, and like sit in a moment and kind of celebrate the decisions that you made that had a positive effect on your life. And I thought that maybe sharing them with you guys on here might give you, I don't know, a little bit of like a spark in your own mind of some ways to congratulate yourself for what you did this year, or start thinking about like what you want to accomplish with the next year. I know that like time is flat, it's an illusion, but still the new year is like a fun time, at least from my standpoint, to just, you know, reflect. So the first thing that I think made a really punctuated difference in my life was going part-time at my day job. So you guys know I've had a role on YouTube for a while, and it's always kind of been, I don't know, kind of fluid in my mind about how it was going to take me to the next step of my life, whether it is the next step of my life, like how much of my time I was going to give to that. But it ended up taking up enough of my life that I was working 7 days a week, and I just made this decision to just give myself a little bit more space. So you might look at it like, oh, that's this decision that you made for you, and you made that possible because you have like this side hustle, but everything that you do has to do with whether or not you are prioritizing your own happiness. Like, take for a second and think, what if, just for today, or you start tomorrow morning, what if everything I did today honored me? And that was like what I asked myself. I said, you know, is that even possible? Like, cause that was my ideal in my brain. Like, what if I were in just like this yoga mindset all the time, you know? Like, what would that be like if I wasn't just stressed out and white knuckling it through life? Like, what would that be like? And it just dawned on me that like that became my mantra. I was like, what if everything that I did today was to honor me? And what that did is it set things in really stark contrast as to the parts of my life that I felt were out of control, and the things that I felt like were, you know, on a path towards the direction I wanted to go in, I guess you could say. But what that requires is a certain degree of selfishness. And I think that women especially, but plenty of us, are very susceptible to feeling like selfish is a bad word. It's something that we've been taught our entire lives that like that's a bad thing to be associated with. The last thing you want to do is be selfish. And as like natural nurturers, a lot of us, we tend to throw ourselves into caring for others, and or kind of the shadow side of that is blaming others for things that happen to us because we aren't really willing to like be selfish or focus on ourselves. So this does require that you focus on yourself, because you need to be introspective. If you think about it, no one else is focusing on the inside of you. They're focusing on the inside of them. So if they're not focusing on you and you're not focusing on you, no one's focusing on you, and that is not what life is for. So one side of that is, you know, allowing yourself to take space for yourself, but also the other half of that, to address that shadow side, is taking responsibility for our own emotions and drawing healthy boundaries that have to do with how we interact with the things that we are coming in contact with on a daily basis and the things that happen to us, instead of trying to control them. Because you can't control the things that are going to happen to you. You can only control how you receive them and what you choose to kind of expose yourself to. And so I did make a decision based upon putting honoring myself at the top of my list, and it required a little bit of risk like in the moment, but I felt like the universe was kind of working with me too. And that'll be kind of a running thread, you know? But I mean, I talked to Leanne, for example, because I knew she had gone part-time at her job when she felt like it was an appropriate thing to do with her channel, and I just ran to her. I was like, how did you do it? Like, what was your mindset? Like, blah, blah. And like, we had felt exactly the same way. She's like, I just knew I could do everything that was required of my job in this certain amount of hours every week instead of being in office, and like no one would know the difference. And I was like, yeah, it's exactly how I feel. And lo and behold, I asked and they said yes. And I was just so overwhelmed with gratitude because I was like this close to like it being all or nothing, you know? It was just, I was so strung out on stress, and it made such a huge, just a huge difference in like my ability to prioritize my own time. Waking up in the morning and only working from home, that is my personal ideal. That's not everyone's ideal. I think that there are a lot of people who would think of that as like their own personal nightmare. Like, I don't get to interact with people at all. I am naturally an introvert. I'm very self-motivated, and I think that one of the biggest observations that I make in hindsight about it was that it was a decision that I made out of prioritizing my own happiness instead of staying somewhere out of fear. Most of the time, if you are in a situation that you don't understand how you got there and you really don't like it, you can usually trace your steps back through decisions made out of fear. And that's like the worst mindset you can be, and that's how you get yourself into a situation you don't recognize. And so just shifting that mindset, allowing yourself to be a little bit more selfish, looking at your day, your day-to-day from the standpoint of, what would my life look like if I were honoring myself? And it doesn't mean like ignoring your children. Like, giving your children attention is still honoring yourself, you know? Like, that's what you want to do because you love them. They're, you know what I mean? It's not so binary. Making that kind of like a mindful step in your life is really the first step towards taking yourself out of a situation that you don't necessarily like, or maybe just making little tweaks along the way that ultimately, like a year from now, make you like your life a lot better. So the next thing that I really feel like made an enormous difference in my life, and hear me out on this, guys, because it is so hard. I made myself sit still. I have a really hard time with stillness, and I will tell you why. It is because I am naturally prone to anxiety and depression. And if you don't know my whole backstory, there is a video on my main channel called like How I Got Here. I will link it below. It's basically my whole mental health journey, so that I don't have to rehash it here. But I think that once you have recognized and forgiven yourself for being flawed and for having this kind of monkey on your back all the time, even if you think you've got a handle on it and you like know your monster on a personal like first name basis, you still have, at least I still had to travel through this whole cycle of like a coping mechanism that was, I was tying my self-worth to my ability to be productive. Like, my self-worth still wasn't innate. You know, if I'm getting stuff done, I'm amazing, I'm fantastic. I feel like Mario when he gets the mushroom or the star or whatever and he's just like on fire. Like, that was how I felt. But what that does is it feeds this cycle of burnout, because eventually you're gonna get like adrenal fatigue or something's going to happen. You're gonna get sick, you're just gonna burn yourself out. And when you have to sit still, there's the monster again. It's been waiting for you the whole time. And then you're back where you started. You have the same problem. You haven't really addressed the problem. All you've done is make a really elaborate way of avoiding it, and it looks positive on the outside. Highly encourage you to read The Untethered Soul. Like, the first 3 chapters are about this, about creating this like elaborate machine so that you can avoid what's actually wrong instead of just speaking directly to it. And so I realized, especially when I was at my worst, which is seasonal depression time of year. And that's also another reason I thought that it was an appropriate time to bring back these videos, is because we're all entering that time of year right now, and the holidays can be really great, but also like right afterwards, we get that big hangover from the holidays and we get super down, like super bummed out. I used to feel so lost and like dread the new year because I was like, well, everything's over. All of the excitement, everything that there is to look forward to is over. What do I do? Like, what am I occupying my mind with? Because quiet and stillness was just not an option, you know? And I would wake up every single day with fear. Fear that if I didn't stay in motion, I would find some scary level of stillness and I would collapse, basically, like psychologically. And I noticed that my husband is just like naturally immune to that. I don't understand why, but he's just this born Taoist. And I decided to just tap on a resource, you know? I said, Mike, what is the first thing? I was like, I'm just gonna examine your process from the very beginning. Like, what do you think as soon as you open your eyes in the morning? And he goes, happy to be alive. And I was like, what? What's that like? You know, here I am like chasing the next thing all the time, like never stopping to think that like the idea of waking up and being grateful to be alive would ever be enough. And then I thought about it for a second and I was like, better than my way. I'm gonna start giving that a shot. You know, wake up in the morning and force it. Just force my brain to go, look at your life, you are happy, everything is good. Look at all these things that you are surrounded by. You have 2 beautiful cats and a beautiful dog and a loving, beautiful husband and a beautiful house and a beautiful life and a career that you've built that you have been so busy you can't even congratulate yourself on milestones about. Like, imagine actually pausing for a moment and appreciating it. It was just this brand new idea, but as soon as I just like cracked the lid on it, everything just poured out and it was just like, yeah, dude, like what are you working for if you don't ever take a second to freaking appreciate it? You're watching all these people on YouTube and they're flexing and all this stuff, you know, their wealth and their cool stuff that they're able to buy and afford and like their really cool life, and you're like, well, I want that, but like you're working so hard to like constantly achieve for this like goal that isn't actually real, because you're constantly moving the goalpost on yourself, that you never actually stop to like think about, wait a second, I'm already here. I did it already. Like, can you just sit still for a second and appreciate your cool life you made? So for whatever reason, that was the spark that I needed to just like unlock this portion of my brain, because like focusing on gratitude when you don't feel grateful is just like another way of beating yourself up. Like you can really string yourself out on trying to make yourself feel an emotion that you don't naturally feel. So I don't suggest just being like, you know, berating yourself because you're like, why are you so ungrateful? Look at your beautiful life. What are you doing? Like, that's not the point. I had to find a way that like unlocked that in my own mind, and for me it was the idea that someone else was looking through the exact same lens that I was. They were seeing the exact same life and they weren't having all these hangups that I was, and it was just like, just asking questions, figuring out how to kind of like unblock myself in that way. But the reason that I was having so much trouble overcoming those things was because I was also comparing myself so much. I was looking at other people who were in my same career path who seemed to be getting opportunities that I wasn't getting. They were just moving more quickly than I was, or I was comparing myself to people who've been doing it a lot longer, and I was just looking at their highlight reel, just very unfair things. Unfair to my own mind, unfair to that other person who has no idea I'm comparing myself to them. But that is just like the most unfair thing you can do to yourself. It is the easiest way to take all of your amazing accomplishments and just like set them on fire, because you don't know, based on what you're looking at on social media, what that person's actual journey was like. By virtue of the fact that they have 1 million followers or something like that means that you found them because they were popular. They were already successful. Don't compare your process, you know? And everybody has their own process, and appreciate it like for its beauty, for its uniqueness, for the gifts that you're getting from overcoming the small challenges and doing the small things to invest in becoming that new version of yourself, instead of just looking at someone else's like finish line, their highlight reel, and comparing myself to that. Those all kind of culminated into this new idea of what it was to sit still. Sitting still became this thing that I forced myself to do, even if it was just like watching the Kardashians on Hulu without commercials. Like, that was like a 4 o'clock activity for me. I was just like, ooh. I have created this cool flexible schedule. Like, if I'm tired, I can chill for a second. Like, there's something really cool about that. It's something that simple that can be a means of appreciating what you've made for yourself, and also turning stillness from something terrifying into something that's about you and about honoring yourself. So that is a huge thing that I shifted in my life this year, like enormous, and I think everybody in my life can feel it, especially my husband, because I am not this constant ball of anxiety anymore. It's awesome. It's great. So that brings me to number 3. The third thing that I did in this past year that I think changed my life completely for the positive was establishing a way of processing stress that is healthy, and healthy for me. I feel like going through our own personal journeys, right? When we're all like deciding that we're going to figure out how to tackle these things in our lives, because we should congratulate ourselves about that to begin with. You know, like, hey, I'm gonna go to therapy, or I'm gonna read some self-help books, or I'm just gonna like ask. I'm just gonna like ask the universe for help, whatever. Just making that decision is an accomplishment in and of itself. But the first thing that tends to happen is that we sort of like splash our own stuff all over everyone around us. We're like constantly kind of looking for feedback, and it's sort of like an anxious attachment to our own emotions, right? We just like need to like bounce these ideas off of different people. That's why therapy is so great, is because you get to keep it kind of siloed, but some of us don't do that. Some of us like go to like other people as resources, and that's totally fine as long as you're not like, you know, making someone else like carry your weight for you. But I found that like the next step for me was to figure out how, when I was feeling really knotted up in my brain, really stressed out, or really burdened by like a set of emotions that I like couldn't process, that I set aside time and I developed a process for myself to be able to work through those things and almost self-therapize. It's not actually possible to like be your own therapist, but there is like a pathway and a set of tools for you to be able to kind of like ask yourself questions so that you can kind of self-diagnose whether this is an issue that you've dealt with in the past and it's just kind of rearing a different face this time, because most of the time these things are something you've already worked through and they're just kind of like surprising in that moment. Like I said, highly recommend The Untethered Soul. It's gonna touch on a lot of that kind of stuff like right out of the gate. So my process really hinges on a conversation with myself, and the best way I've found to have a conversation with myself is journaling. A lot of people have really elaborate or very detailed ways of journaling. Mine are very Aries. There's no real detail to it. It is truly a conversation with myself in the form of writing. And I love these little gridded notebooks, like the Rhodias. I love them because they're not like, I don't know, it doesn't feel as boxed in. Like I can draw, I can do whatever I want. I can, you know what I mean? And the lines are really tiny. I feel like I can fit a lot of thoughts on a page. Totally personal. But I started by just like asking myself diagnostic questions like, what is really bothering you? What part of you hurts when that bothers you? What do you fear? Like, what is the worst case scenario of that fear that you're feeling? Like, if this were to continue, what do you feel like is the worst thing that could happen? And then you kind of trace those feelings back to why they're there in the first place. And then you can decide whether that's something that's warranted and whether it like serves you right now, or whether it's a fear, which it is in most cases, that came from like a previous time in your life that isn't really serving a purpose anymore. So like, for example, if my husband said something to me that I felt like was triggering, like if he said something like, God, you're so weird, you know, like, and in kind of like a dismissive or misunderstanding kind of way, I would internalize that and be like, I would say like, you know, why is weird such a bad thing? Like, just because you grew up popular and I was always the weirdo, you know, now you're gonna say that to me because that's the kind of thing that you would say to somebody just because you don't understand them and you don't want to understand, blah, 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 you know what I mean? And your brain just starts spinning. And instead, I would just kind of like take that feeling and say, you know what, we're going to address this privately. And then when I got a minute, I would sit down and journal it out. And I would say, okay, where did that fear come from? That fear comes from the fact that that was the pejorative that was used on me when I was bullied as a kid. It was always this way of othering me, and it's something that since then I've really turned into a positive, but it hit me sideways because it was someone I loved saying it to me, and I felt misunderstood in that moment, and I really, really don't like being misunderstood. Most people don't. And I have this like very strong need to be understood, and I think it comes from being like the younger child. I think it comes from people making assumptions about me during my parents' divorce, you know, and like assuming that I felt a certain way when like they didn't ask me or things like that, and just different like things. Usually it has to do with your inner child. Just gonna go ahead and tell you, read It's Not Your Money by Tosha Silver. It's, you know, very, very good at like, you know, talking about your inner child. Most of the time, getting to know your inner child is like the first 10 steps in diagnosing anything that is like hitting you the wrong way. The ultimate lesson there was that it had nothing to do with my husband, and I was taking out my own weird sensitivity on him because of something he had nothing to do with. And I was able to decide this coping mechanism is no longer useful to you. That doesn't mean I'm gonna solve it right then and there, like, oh, that was easy, I'm a robot, let's just like put a patch, you know, in the software. Like, no, that's not how it works. But now I get to be aware of that going forward, and that that process is so unscary now. It used to be so scary because it was like this mysterious corner of my brain that like I would panic and shut down and try and protect myself. But now it's like when something hits me sideways, I can most of the time in a pretty close like amount of time, like, you know, as soon as whatever conversation or situation is over or whatever, I can at least tell myself like I'm gonna go set the time aside, and I go and I ask myself like my process of kind of diagnostic questions. Now sometimes I have to like let myself come back down, because a lot of times it is like fight or flight. It's not just that it's a situation that you can just say like, okay, I'm gonna turn this off and I'll address it later. It's like, no, sometimes you're like in a heightened sense, like you have a really high heartbeat and like a frontal lobe headache, and you're just feeling really agitated, and you have to have kind of other way, like remove yourself from the situation. Tactical breathing, 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. Amazing way to calm yourself, but also recognize the patterns of what tends to throw you off often. So if you start to see that certain things hit you wrong over and over and over again, it might be part of a larger issue. I had to decide for myself, you know, sitting in traffic, it made me crazy. I mean, it made me crazy because I'm like this productivity junkie. And so here I was thinking about all the things I needed to get done, but I was stuck in this physical manifestation of gridlock in Austin, Texas at rush hour. Every single day I was losing like 2.5 hours just to commuting, just sitting there. And it was just so aggravating. There was like no way for me to not get agitated. And like that was one of those things that influenced my sensibility about like, I gotta do something about this. Like this is affecting my quality of life and I hate it. And it's like, I totally understand that some people would say like, get over it, millennial. And to you I say, you know what? You have as many options as you want to have. You get to decide what your life looks like. I think that customizing your life to you is not that much to ask, especially if it means that you're like a better contributor to everything else in your life. It's just a matter of like working towards that point, and it looks different for everybody. But for me, establishing a process for the things that were just, you know, regular everyday kind of hangups for me, and then also learning to understand what was kind of like a more overarching problem, and, you know, wanting to kind of diagnose that on a larger scale, but figuring out that process for yourself and like what works for you in talking yourself through this stuff, it makes it so much less scary when unexpected bad things that you can't control happen to you. Okay, so number 4 has to do with clinging and non-attachment. So I know that sounds like, you know, it's Buddhist philosophy, right? It was something that I learned about in college, but it never really resonated with me until I started to achieve some sense of like adult success, you know, where you start having like actual money that isn't paycheck to paycheck, and you're actually able to save, and you're actually able to like buy a house and stuff like that. Just really, really cool things, but like they don't hit you the way that you think they're going to. You know, instead of, like I said earlier, just like being able to sit and appreciate it, you tend to keep moving the goalpost on yourself, and it makes it hard to be grateful. And so I have been hung up probably a few different times this year on this feeling of, I find myself like buying a lot and consuming a lot. When I lost my job last year, I was able to get back in touch with this like minimalist part of myself because I didn't have any money. But then as soon as I started working a full-time job again in January of this year, it was incredible how quick I snapped back into materialism and I've got money, therefore I'm going to spend my money. Like my existence was my buying power. And I was like, how did I get back in this toxic mindset? And more importantly, how do I get out of it? I would like to have money, not just spend money. And I mean, I rewatched the Minimalist documentary. I read, like I said, It's Not Your Money by Tosha Silver. I realized that my relationship with money was off. And it had to do with a scarcity mindset from growing up. We weren't poor, but we had like a collective scarcity mindset. I was very aware of money from a very early age. I feel like that was something that I was just kind of like saddled with my entire life, mainly by my own doing. It was just something that I always felt like money equals anxiety. And when you have money, you finally have freedom to like buy what you want. But that sort of like reflected back on me in this way that was like, okay, well, you have money, now you should buy what you want. And I started to feel really empty. That was the hardest part, was like I'd be watching especially all these influencers and stuff. You realize that like there are influencers who make lots of content about like being very, very wealthy who are like not that happy. That part of like social media is what, I mean, it's the same thing as like being advertised to. We are taught, and you have to recognize this, we are taught to feel inadequate by advertisements because they want us to buy things. That is exactly what they're for. It is a tale as old as time. We have been basically like a victim of this manufactured idea that lifestyle has to do with consuming new things all the time. And the product of that is that we kind of feel like the next thing is always gonna make us happy. It's always the next thing, you know, as long as I've got enough money to keep buying the next thing, then I can stay happy. But like you realize that things eventually, like, yeah, to a certain point, things make you happy. If you're homeless, a thing like a house is gonna make you really happy. And if you're hungry, a thing like food is gonna make you really happy. If you're cold, a blanket, you know what I mean? But like past a certain point, things don't really make you happy anymore, and you have to ask yourself the hard question of like, why am I not happy? The thing I had to recognize was that was what they mean when they're talking about clinging. You are clinging to a thing that you know because you don't trust the unknown and you're trying to control it. Bear with me here, follow me, okay? So we all imagine our lives and our futures in the context of what we have already experienced. It's the only way that we can. The way that we imagine our future in terms of something that we have yet to experience that could be even more amazing than anything we've experienced so far, which is what we want, right? Is to trust the unknown. Some call it faith. Trusting the unknown, the unknowable horizon, trusting that the future is actually cooler than you can imagine is the way to detach from that clinging feeling. You start to be able to recognize the tension in your chest and in your head and in your eyes and in your brain when you start to like cling and want something, and maybe like backpedal in your brain as to why. Is it because it's some kind of status item? And does it make you think of maybe the last thing that you bought that was kind of like that, and maybe that it sits in your closet now, and you, after you bought it, you really didn't feel that accomplished and you didn't really like use it as much as you thought that you were going to. So I had to like establish a new kind of neural pathway for myself, like a new process, where when I saw something that I wanted, I thought of it as, is this a lifestyle item that you feel like is going to like contribute to some kind of like mental identity for you and make you more like this thing you're comparing yourself to? Or is it something that you really feel like you're gonna love and use and is going to be like of value to you even after you buy it? It's not just an accomplishment that you bought it. Completely changed the way I look at things, and it helped me recognize in real time when that feeling is happening. And it also helped me free up the mind space to actually have effective meditation, because when you're meditating, you constantly try to cling. The thoughts that are entering your brain, that's the whole thing, is you're supposed to like let them pass. So you're not supposed to grab onto them, right? But that's really, really hard because your brain wants to grab onto something, okay? That's the whole thing, is you're just like, but there's a thought, oh, there's one. Okay, don't grab onto that, but now I'm grabbing onto not grabbing onto things. Like it just, the whole idea being, free yourself from that. Not think about not clinging. Free yourself from clinging. Like recognize when it's happening, and you can actually feel the tension break. You can be like, let go. And you just let it go and you realize there were no consequences. Close that tab on your browser, close the Instagram post or whatever. Your brain clears up and there are no consequences. It's fantastic, and it frees your brain and it makes more money in your bank account because you're not constantly consuming just to declare that you're succeeding, I guess, is the way that it applies to my life. We've been joined by a dog. Hello. Finally, number 5. I think that this is actually something that like is very subtle but very effective. I made a conscious effort to control the type of media that I'm voluntarily putting into my face. So like, especially on YouTube, I did find myself kind of watching what I considered to be, you know, intelligent drama commentary. I'm not gonna name names on channels or anything because I did stop watching them. And it is mainly because I found that even, you know, not just like the tea spill channels, but like even the ones that are making like hot takes, you know, very intelligent people with a lot of really good points, but still commenting on other people's lives. People, especially YouTubers, who are doing things that are very dramatic and doing it exactly for that purpose to kind of feed that machine. I just wanted to remove myself from being part of it. It's not so much that I condemn it and think that it's bad. It's just that I realized when I would watch these, like, I would get on a deep dive, because that's what you do. You're just like, oh, like this person who's making this content is really smart. They have a really, really cool take on these kinds of things. I want to continue watching their videos because it's captivating. I found myself at the end of those kinds of deep dives feeling really negative and that it occupied a lot more of my like brain space than just the time watching the videos, and that then I was getting served a lot of that stuff in my suggested as well. And I think that that's something that we kind of don't take into consideration a lot, is that we're actually in control of these algorithms. We're telling the platform, whichever one you want to talk about, what to serve us next. We can vote with our clicks, we can vote with our eyeballs as to what we want to watch and what we want to have like fed back to us, because the internet is just an echo chamber. And so when we tell the internet, hey, this is how I like spending my time, the internet is not doing you a disservice by giving you more content, even if that content doesn't necessarily make you feel good. So this is all part of like the overarching concept of, you know, life, and a happy life is built in very tiny little actions and how you decide to spend your time versus grand gestures. And I found that making a conscious effort to be mindful of how I was investing my time in small increments helped me so much to refocus my brain's energy on what was going to make me happy long term, instead of just that little shot in the arm of drama on the internet. Literally, life is time spent. So that was such a surprising shift for me, because it is portrayed on YouTube as something that's very innocuous. You watch a video about drama just to find out what's going on, right? You know, if you watch a Shane video, even though it's not necessarily a drama video, everybody wants to know the take on the drama that happened to Jeffree Star, and then you end up being like, well, I don't really know what happened. Like, can someone inform me? And then you feel like you're almost like informing yourself, like watching a news story or something, and then you realize how much of your own time you've invested in someone else's life, very negative aspects of someone else's life that you have nothing to do with, and they have nothing to do with you. And then there are people like James Charles who are gaming it. Literally photoshopping Louis Vuitton onto his eye just because he knows he's gonna get caught, and he knows he's gonna go viral about it, because everybody's like, oh, James Charles, how did you think no one was going to notice this? You're such a fraud. And he's just like, oh gosh, am I a fraud? Did I get caught? And it's like, all this is one elaborate machine with a bunch of people who know exactly how to work the levers, and I just removed myself from it. And you know what? You can't entirely remove yourself from it. It still gets served to you sometimes because it's so viral and it's so popular, but there was like a part of me that detached from it, and that part of me can now detect it in real time and go, no, no, I'm starting to cling. It's another example of clinging to something that is very low vibe. It's just a really petty, icky set of shallow feelings that I don't want to enter into my brain if I can help it. So that was just a decision I made for myself. If that is not something that makes you feel that way, if you don't feel negative from watching that kind of thing on the internet, then more power to you. If you can like come away from it completely unaltered, totally fine. If it is literally your way of unwinding, the way that it is for me to watch Dr. Pimple Popper, like absolutely, girl, like do you. I'm just saying, take inventory of the things that seem normal and seem like a habit when it comes to consuming media that are actually making you feel like not that great in the long run. And that could also be on Instagram, and just unfollow. You won't miss it. You'll feel better. And it is one more step towards making your life happier in the long run, because life is time spent. So those are all of my 5. I could go on and on about this stuff, but this is already a very long video. I want to make more self-help personal development content for you guys. I want to get educated. I want to get like credibility on this. I want to, you know, actually get a certification for like life coaching or something like that. That's one of my big upcoming goals. But yeah, I mean, until then, I can only offer advice like from my heart and from like what I've experienced. And that is all that this is. I'm not a medical professional or a doctor or anything like that. It's just advice from someone who has been through, you know, my specific path and my lens of, you know, overcoming these negative thoughts and depression and anxiety and things like that. So I hope that this was fun and helpful for you guys, my little vlog fam. I love you guys so much. If you did enjoy this, if you haven't subscribed already, then go ahead and subscribe. These are thumbs up, and you can give it a thumbs up as well. But thank you so much for watching and for hanging out with me today, guys. I love you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. I love having all of this room. Why don't I use a wide angle more often? You can see my hands. Okay, I'm gonna go.